She heard her name from behind and was confronted with the sight of her husband, who was walking hand in hand with her best friend Adiola. Omotola stood frozen as her heart felt a mix of emotions. The sight before her was both a dream come true and a potential nightmare. Her husband Sheun, whom she had longed for, was back but not alone. The presence of Adiola, her dearest friend, carrying the unmistakable sign of pregnancy, painted a complex picture she was not prepared to see. Once upon a time, there lived two best friends who had been friends for so many years. Their names were Adiola and Omotola, and they lived next to each other. Omotola was married to a very handsome man named Sheun, who loved her with all of his heart, whilst her friend Adiola was still single, hoping to find a man who would love her as much as Sheun loved her friend Omotola. One night, Omotola and Adiola were sitting by the fireside when Omotola revealed that she was pregnant. Adiola was so excited to hear the news as she screamed at the top of her voice in excitement. She told her friend Omotola not to engage in any strenuous work again as she was going to do everything for her. Adiola, being her friend's neighbor, moved into her friend's hut to look after her during the pregnancy. In this time, Adiola cooked for her friend, cleaned for her, and took care of all the strenuous chores whilst Omotola rested fully. This went on for months till one fateful day when Adiola returned home from the market extremely sad and in tears. Omotola was worried as she had never seen Adiola in such a state before. She asked Adiola why she was crying, and Adiola told her that her mother was sick and dying. The village herbalist had requested for a very rare herb which could only be found deep in the village forest, saying that if the herb was not produced, her mother might die. Adiola was so worried because the forest was not a safe place for a woman to wander all alone, especially at night. She pleaded with her friend Omotola to borrow her husband so that he would accompany her into the forest to retrieve the rare herb, and Omotola agreed without hesitation, for the bond between them was stronger than blood. Her husband Sheun, bound by his love for his wife Omotola, consented to the journey, unaware of the fate that awaited them on the way. They journeyed into the forest in search of the rare herb, and after a few hours, the sky began to grow dark. Adiola began to panic as she feared what would happen to her mother if the herb was not found. As they continued to comb through the forest for the herb, they came across an ancient Iroko tree whose trunk was etched with strange symbols. Adiola and Sheun approached the tree and caught sight of the rare herb which they had been searching for all the while. Adiola plucked the herb in excitement and hurriedly turned to return home. However, back in the village, Omotola sat in front of her hut as she waited for her husband and friend to return. It was already dark, and Omotola knew how dangerous the forest was at night and prayed for their safe return. She waited for hours, but Sheun and Adiola were nowhere to be found. Terrified at what might have happened, Omotola raised an alarm as some villagers gathered to know what was happening. Omotola told the villagers that she had a bad feeling that something bad might have happened to her husband and friend who left for the forest earlier that afternoon and had still not returned, and the villagers, on seeing how worried she was, decided to head into the forest in search of them. They combed the forest for hours, but Sheun and Adiola were nowhere to be found. Omotola waited up all night, but her husband and friend still did not return. By morning, she was so devastated as she feared that something terrible would have happened to them. Her fears deepened when the second search party returned from the forest with her husband's shoes, which they found deep in the forest. Omotola stared at the shoes as a million thoughts ran through her mind. Could they be dead? She said to herself as she began to weep profusely. As the days went by, Omotola did everything possible to remain positive. She would stand at the entrance of the forest every morning, singing her husband's favorite song, hoping that he would hear the song and find his way home. As days turned into weeks and weeks into months, Omotola's pregnancy progressed, but her husband and friend had still not returned. However, what Omotola did not know was that her husband and friend were lost in a different world. Immediately Adiola plucked the hair by the Iroko tree. They were sucked into the ancient tree and arrived a small village filled with people who spoke a strange language. Adiola and Sheun could no longer remember anything from their past lives, not even their names. However, they knew that they had a strong connection, and this led them to believe that they were most likely husband and wife. As they stood at the entrance of the village, an old woman and a young girl approached them and took them home. Although the people of this village spoke in a strange language, Sheun and Adiola found themselves speaking the language as though it was their mother tongue. They were given new names, Ayo and Aduke, and with no memory of their past, they embraced this new chapter of their lives with open arms. As months passed, Omotola gave birth to a beautiful baby girl who she named Ire, meaning goodness, in the hope that goodness would one day return to her life. Despite her sorrow, she raised Ire with stories of her father's kindness, nurturing her with love and hope that her father would one day return. Adiola and Sheun, however, lived as husband and wife in the strange land. They were given a hut to live by the old woman and her daughter, who were so friendly and kind to them. As the months passed, Adiola got pregnant for Sheun, who was excited to finally become a father. One morning, Adiola was in her hut when she heard a loud scream outside. She rushed to check who it was and caught sight of the old woman's daughter, who had just been bitten by a venomous snake. Adiola quickly rushed to a nearby bush and plucked some herbs, which she used to prepare a paste she applied on the young girl's wound. Miraculously, the pain subsided and the swelling began to decrease. The old woman and her daughter were so grateful to Adiola for being so kind. However, as time went on, Adiola noticed that the old woman and her daughter were beginning to look at them in a very strange way. This troubled Adiola, who wondered why they suddenly began to act so weirdly around her. One morning, Adiola and Sheun were about heading to the village stream when the old woman's daughter approached them to warn of an impending danger. She informed them that the people were planning to sacrifice them to their gods that evening and that they had to run away to avoid being killed. The young girl told them that she was helping them because of Adiola's kindness towards her when she was bitten by the venomous snake. Adiola and Sheun opened their mouths in shock as the young girl told them to find their way to the Iroko tree in the forest, as that is the only way they could escape from being killed. Still heavily pregnant, Adiola and Sheun fearfully ran away from the old woman's hut and headed straight for the forest. As they ventured into the forest, bits and pieces of their memory began to return. Adiola remembered her friend Omotola as well as her mother, who she left in the village extremely sick. As she turned to Sheun, her memory of him returned. She immediately remembered the husband of who he was, and this shattered her heart as she wondered how she could have made such a terrible mistake to believe that Sheun was her own husband. With every step, Adiola's heart shattered. She wondered how she would be able to face her best friend, whose husband she was now pregnant for. Sheun too remembered his past and was now filled with shame of the atrocity he had unknowingly committed. As they wandered in the forest, they noticed that the villagers were now looking for them. Adiola and Sheun ran aimlessly, hoping to find the Iroko tree, their hearts racing as they navigated the thick forest. Their fears were amplified by the sound of the villagers' distant shouts. Terrified at what will happen if the villagers closed in on them, Sheun began to hear a familiar voice which sang a song that calmed his heart. "Can you hear that song?" he asked Adiola, who looked at him confused, as all she could hear were the chirping of the birds. Sheun felt compelled to follow the familiar voice, and as they ran towards the voice, they found themselves in front of the huge Iroko tree. Adiola and Sheun were overjoyed as they approached the tree. They knelt in front of the tree confused as they wondered how the tree could help them return home. Adiola, in that moment, remembered what happened before they disappeared and reached for the herb that was planted next to the Iroko tree. The villagers were now closing in on them when a very bright light enveloped Adiola and Sheun, who found themselves back in their village. All their memories were now restored, and the duo wondered how they would explain all that happened to Omotola, who they both loved with all their heart. They emerged from the forest and caught sight of Adiola, who stood at the entrance of the forest in tears. For all these months, Adiola never missed showing up at the entrance of the forest with her daughter, as she hoped that the song that she always sang would one day lead her husband home. As she turned to return back to her hut, she heard her name from behind and was confronted with the sight of her husband, who was walking hand in hand with her best friend Adiola. Omotola stood frozen as her heart felt a mix of emotions. The sight before her was both a dream come true and a potential nightmare. Her husband Sheun, whom she had longed for, was back but not alone. The presence of Adiola, her dearest friend, carrying the unmistakable sign of pregnancy, painted a complex picture she was not prepared to see. Sheun, taking a deep breath, began to recount their extraordinary journey. He spoke of the strange land, their survival, the kindness of the old woman and her daughter, and the harrowing escape from the fate that would have seen them sacrificed. As he spoke, Adiola interrupted, her voice shaking, as she tried to explain the circumstances that led to her mistaken belief that Sheun was her husband. Omotola listened quietly, her heart torn between the relief of their return and the pain of betrayal. Omotola found it difficult to believe their story, as the thought of her best friend being pregnant for her husband broke her heart into a million pieces. She regretted ever letting her husband escort her friend into the forest and blamed herself for all that happened. Her friendship with Adiola was tested in ways that she never imagined possible. For weeks, Omotola kept away from her husband and friend, who did everything possible to gain her forgiveness. Her husband's return brought back the joy that had fled their home, yet it also carried the weight of untold stories and unasked questions. One night, whilst Omotola slept, an old woman approached her in the dream, revealing that all her husband and her friend had told her were the truth. The old woman urged Omotola to forgive her friend and husband, who were only victims of the powerful Iroko tree. Omotola woke up feeling a sense of calm. She waited until the break of dawn and approached her friend and husband, revealing that she had forgiven them. Sheun and Adiola could not believe their ears As they burst out in tears, they apologized for what their unconscious actions might have done to Omotola, promising never to do anything to hurt her again. As the weeks passed, everyone began to heal, and Adiola gave birth to a beautiful baby girl who she named Ife. They were so overjoyed at the birth of the baby and vowed not to let the hurt of the past to dictate their future. Adiola later found a man who loved her with all of his heart. They got married, and Adiola handed over her daughter to Omotola, who became her daughter's new mother as she moved out of the village with her husband to start a new life. That was how Sheun and Omotola lived happily with their two daughters, who grew up in love and harmony. The lesson to be learned from this story is that we should always be kind and compassionate towards others, as our act of kindness can turn out to be our only saving grace. We should also learn to forgive others when they wrong us, because forgiveness has the power to heal wounds and restore broken relationships. I hope you enjoyed the story.
Like, subscribe, and leave a comment. It helps us grow our channel. I'll see you in our next story. Bye.